Hello and welcome to Briefing 5 in the series Marketing for Charities, brought to you by the Worshipful Company of Marketers. My name's Peter Rees, and in this briefing I shall be covering the topic of objectives. This briefing is likely to be a little bit shorter than recent ones, and in it I'm going to cover the following agenda items. I'll start off with a discussion about aims and objectives and some other business terminology, just to get them clear and help you to approach this area in the most effective way. I'm then going to give you a short discussion about setting objectives and identify the best possible approach for charities. I'll go through the next steps and how this series will progress into the next briefing, tell you how any questions can be handled, and as usual finish with a few concluding remarks. I'll just take a checkpoint here and remind you where we've got to in our discussions. In this briefing I'm going to talk about the second step in the SOSTAC model, which is all about the setting of objectives, and it really answers the question, where are we going? And as you can see here on this next slide, one of my favourite quotes from Lewis Carroll says that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And that's why it's so important to set objectives for the business plan, for the marketing plan, because that, if you like, establishes the end of our journey. That's where we're going to try and get to. So the first section of the SOSTAC plan is situation analysis, which is where are we today, and this section talks about objectives, which is where we are going. Now, this often causes a bit of confusion amongst chief executives and directors of charities that I've worked with, and it's a concept that not everybody fully embraces. I've asked a couple of people in the past, so what's your objective? What's your target for this year? And they look at me slightly blankly, and I said, well, what are you planning to make in revenue this year? What's your income going to be? And they say things like, well, I'll be able to tell you at the end of the year, or I'll be able to tell you in December, because by then I'll know what's happened. But really, marketing is about setting an endpoint, a place you want to get to, and then putting in place plans and tactics to help you to get there. So that's why setting objectives is so important. So here's the start of this section, which I've slightly expanded to aims and objectives, because I'm going to talk about the different terminologies that relate to this area of marketing and business planning. There are four key terms that are used in this area of business planning, which is shown on this diagram here: aims, objectives, goals and targets. And they're often misused, and some people mix them up and seem to think they're all interchangeable. Well, in fact, they're not. They mean different things. And what I'm going to do in this section is describe what those differences are, and then focus on the difference between aims and objectives and targets, which are the main three areas that we're going to discuss. So the first one is aims, and aims are narrative, general, descriptive, qualitative statements of what you wish to achieve. So an aim might be to expand the reach of the charity into new areas, or to improve our brand awareness, or to increase our presence and visibility on social media. It's a general, descriptive, narrative statement, and that is an aim. The next term, and the one I'm going to be largely focusing on in this section, is objectives. And objectives, by comparison to aims, are numeric, quantitative, and they're a single focused statement of what you wish to achieve. They often start with the word to. So an objective might be to increase the number of visitors to our website to 50,000 within 6 months. And they describe what success would look like. So objectives are the things you want to achieve, and if you achieve them at the end of the year, at the end of the planning period, if you achieve them all, then you have been successful. So think of it this way: they're a statement of what success looks like. The next term that I'll describe to you is that of goals, and to me goals are broadly equivalent to objectives, and so I won't use this term in this briefing and in subsequent briefings. So goals, file away in your mind that goals are similar to objectives, and because they are so similar, and to avoid confusion, I won't use that term. The final term I want to discuss on this slide is that of a target, and as you can see here, the place where an objective takes you when it's successfully completed is the target. So for example, if you had an objective to increase the client engagement by 5%, then the target would be the number you would have achieved if you had made that objective. So in this example, if you had 100 client engagements a week that you were currently delivering, an increase of 5% would mean the target would be 105 engagements. I'd like to introduce you now to a particular marketing acronym, which is SMART. And SMART are the characteristics of well-written objectives. And in order to be successful, properly written objectives should have all of the characteristics of the acronym SMART. So let me tell you what each of the letters stands for. The first letter of SMART is the S, which stands for specific, and this indicates that a properly written objective should just focus on one specific understandable area and make it very clear what it is that you're talking about. So anybody reading it would understand the single thing that that objective is trying to achieve. The second letter of SMART is M for measurable. And this means that the objective should be something that can be measured cost effectively, could be cost effectively quantified. Now, larger organisations and larger charities can have fairly exotic objectives because they have the money and the resources to do the necessary research to see if they've been achieved. Other charities with less resources and less capabilities sometimes set objectives which are actually not practical to measure. So make sure that your objectives have the capacity to be measured within the budgetary constraints of your charity. The third letter of SMART is A for achievable, and this means that the objective is likely to be met and it's possible to achieve it given the resources of the charity. Now, many times when I'm speaking to managers and directors and chief executives of charities, they can often be either wildly optimistic or wildly pessimistic, and therefore set objectives which are not achievable. So please make sure that following your marketplace assessment, following the market research and the situation analysis that you've done, you set realistic objectives that are achievable given the resources of your charity. The next thing that SMART indicates is the R for relevant, and this means that objectives should be something that's relevant and actually will advance the aims and objectives of your charity. All too often people set fairly exotic, fairly fanciful objectives, which even if they meet the other criteria of SMART, they're not actually relevant and won't advance the aims and objectives of the charity. It's a sort of wished for outcome rather than anything that's practical or useful. So the final letter of SMART is T for time bound, and this is stating the end date or the period in which the objective should be achieved, whether it's at the end of the first quarter, in the next 3 months, or by the end of the year. You should always have a time associated with the achievement of every objective. So just to summarise, here are the characteristics of objectives. Each objective should have each characteristic. It should be specific and measurable and achievable and relevant and time bound in order for it to be practical and useful for your charity. And on the next slide, I'm going to give you some examples of objectives and see if you can determine whether it is in fact a proper SMART objective or something else. So my question to you on this slide is, are these SMART objectives? The first one I'd like you to think about is this statement. The statement is to improve the charity's brand image and engagement with its donors and sponsors. So my question to you is that a SMART objective? And if you need to pause here and go back to the previous slide, then please do so. The answer, of course, is that is not a SMART objective. It is an aim. It's general, it's narrative, it's descriptive, it's got no numbers and no time associated with it. So it is an aim, not a bad aim, it's an aim, but not an objective. So tell me what you think about this next statement. This says to recruit at least 10 new volunteers in each quarter in 2020 by increasing the number of visitors to the volunteering section of the website to at least 100 unique monthly visitors within 3 months. So my question to you is that a SMART objective? It seems to have all the characteristics of a SMART objective. It's got a number, it's got a date by which it should be achieved, but in fact that is not a SMART objective. It is in fact two. It's attained to 2 SMART objectives and should therefore be split accordingly. So the first objective written here is to recruit at least 10 new volunteers in each quarter in 2020, which if you go through the letters is SMART. And the second objective is to increase the number of visitors to the volunteering section of the website to at least 100 unique monthly visitors within 3 months. So if you remember my earlier discussion about SMART, the first letter stands for specific, so it should just relate to one area. So if you split that sentence into 2 parts, then it would be 2 very good SMART objectives. And the final statement here I'd like you to think about is to increase the awareness of our charity by 10% during the planned communications campaign in the second half of 2020. So think about that and consider, is that a SMART objective? This statement of an objective fails the test for being a SMART objective for a number of reasons. The first of all is it's not specific in 2 areas, and these are the statement to increase the awareness of our charity is not specific enough. It doesn't tell you what sort of awareness are you trying to improve upon. Is it the awareness when people see a list of charities and they have to say which ones they already knew about? Or is it unprompted awareness, where people are just invited to tell you a list of all the charities they know in a specific area, such as, for example, cancer research? The second thing that fails in the specificity category is that it doesn't tell you whose awareness you're trying to increase. Are you trying to increase awareness among the general public, members of a political party or the government, potential donors, potential sponsors, or potential volunteers? So it fails for two reasons in the area of not being specific. The second thing is that even if you did specify what sort of awareness you were trying to test, and let us say that you decided it was awareness amongst potential donors, then it would be quite expensive actually to measure the current level of awareness and the level of awareness after the campaign in any sort of cost-effective manner. To do a survey amongst the general population of potential donors, you might need to ask perhaps 200 or 300 people to get a representative sample to have meaningful actionable data that you could work upon. So I think also for most charities it's not measurable in any cost-effective sort of a way. I'll now pull everything together and show you this following table, and this really talks about the things we need to think about when we're setting objectives. The first row there talks about the objective itself, and that can be set in two ways, as I've indicated before, either as a raw number or as a percentage change. So for example, you could set an objective to say we want to increase the number of volunteers we have in the charity by 10 in the first quarter. Or as a percentage change, you could say we want to increase the donor income in the first half of the year by 10%. So one is an absolute number, the second one is a change. And to give you some examples of the sorts of objectives that charities typically set, it's things like this. It could be unique monthly visitors to your website. It could be requests for information or application forms, perhaps for people applying to be a volunteer or an assistant in your organisation. You might want to measure and have an objective for the number of client engagement sessions per month, whether it's counselling or places in a refuge or medical treatments or advice sessions. So how many of those per month do you wish to achieve? You might have a target for donor income, perhaps per quarter, or the number of people attending a specific event that you've put in place through one of your communications activities. So that's the first thing to think about. Just to wrap up and clarify the thing about targets that I mentioned before, if you set an objective as a raw number, we want to increase the number of volunteers in our organisation by 10 in the first quarter, the target in that case is 10. If you'd set an objective in the format of a percentage change, the target is the actual number that that percentage change represents. The next thing you need to think about is the source of the data. And depending on what the objective is, you can measure it using tools such as Google Analytics or your banking records or client engagement database or application forms processed or downloaded from your website and returned to you. So whenever you're setting an objective, you need to think about the source and the process by which you will gather that data. And the final thing to think about is how frequently are you going to measure it. Things like donor income you might wish to measure quarterly, things like client engagements or beneficiary assistance that you've given you might want to measure on a weekly or monthly basis. So that's just a summary of the area of objective setting and the things you need to think about when you're setting your SMART objectives. The next area I want to discuss with you is a sort of related area, and it's all about setting marketing budgets. And from my experience over the number of years that I've worked with charities, I've found that this is not consistently done on a very effective basis. So let me talk about the different methods of setting marketing budgets and identify and highlight to you my recommended approach. The first method is politely called competitive parity, which basically means you're copying other people and you're copying other charities, either looking at what percentage of their income they spend on marketing, or looking at some local radio and press activity and working out how much they're spending on it, or seeing what events they're doing and offering similar events. Now the problem with this is that you are not the same as these competitor charities. And I don't mean the same in your size or your actual what you do, but it's what you're trying to achieve with your marketing plan, because objectives describe where you want your marketing activity to take you to. So different charities have different marketing objectives and different aims overall for their charity. Some charities might be interested in recruiting new volunteers or retaining existing donors or going into new markets or bringing new services to bear. So it really depends what they're trying to achieve compared to what you're trying to achieve, and copying people just on a purely numeric basis of percentage of money spent on marketing or the spend on particular advertising campaigns, and you mirror that, is not going to be very cost effective. And as I like to say, that if you do this very well, you will just achieve mediocrity. You'll be the same as everybody else. And my friend Professor Malcolm MacDonald has a brilliant way of expressing this. He says, imagine it's like you're lying in the kitchen with your head in the oven and your feet in the refrigerator, saying, on average, I'm at a pretty comfortable temperature. The next method that I've seen employed very often, particularly in the smaller charities, is what I call the Hindsight Method, and it's typically found with people with limited marketing or limited financial experience. And basically it involves looking at last year and expressing this year's budget as a percentage change. And it's typically expressed as something like, this year our budget would be to increase our revenue by 5% and reduce our costs by 5%. Well, if you think about that in the long term, that's not logical or sustainable. You can't carry on increasing revenue every year by 5% and reducing costs, because eventually you'll get to a situation where you'll not have a sustainable business model. The next thing is that it doesn't take into account the changing environment. New opportunities and new threats are coming along all the time, and the environment this year, as we've seen in 2020, is totally different to the environment last year. So setting a budget based on what happened in the past is not a good way, or not a good benchmark for setting objectives and budgets for looking to the future, which is why the most important first stepping point of the business plan that we discussed before is a situation analysis, understanding what the world and the sector and your charity are like at the moment, looking forward rather than backward, and see what you can realistically achieve, understanding the threats and the opportunities that present themselves to you in your marketing activity. So basically, this model, I think, is to be avoided. It's not logical and it's unsustainable. And I like to express it as it's like trying to drive a car by looking in the rear view mirror. Not a safe thing to do. The next method is what I've called the affordable method. And this is really found in organisations, commercial organisations or charities that really don't understand the true value of marketing. And it really says that the marketing budget in these sorts of organisations, the amount that's left over after all other costs have been allocated. What this results in is usually a very small amount of money allocated to the marketing activity, which further reinforces the lack of value that marketing delivers, because it gives very limited scope for action or achievement. So if you work in an organisation that uses the affordable method, it's likely, I think, that you're not going to value the activities of marketing, and the fact that you give them a small budget means that they don't achieve very much, which further reinforces this stereotype and really doesn't maximise the opportunity that you have by running an efficient marketing function within your charity. The best practice method, and the one that I recommend, is called objective and task, and it works as follows. What you need to do is create a table where you list the objectives you're trying to achieve, work out what you need to do to make them happen, and estimate a budget for each of those activities. So to work through the examples here, we've shown that one of the objectives is to recruit 10 new volunteers in the first quarter. And you might decide to do that through a local radio campaign, which would cost you £2,000, and some local press advertising for £1,000. And therefore you have a budget of £3,000 because you believe it's effective to spend £3,000 to retain the services of 10 new volunteers. Objective 2 is to raise £20,000 of sponsorship by the end of the year. And the way you plan to do that is to have a private dinner for high net worth individuals. And you can see there in the centre of the slide, the budget for that is estimated at £2,000, and you'll do some public relations activity before or after the dinner to highlight the achievement, and that would cost you £1,000. So the budget for that objective and achieving that objective using those tasks is £3,000. And finally, objective 3 is to generate 5,000 Facebook followers in the next 6 months. And the way you'll do that is with a Facebook ad campaign for £2,000 and some Twitter advertising for £2,000. And you see, therefore, to achieve that objective using the tasks shown here, the budget would be £4,000. Now, the benefit of this method is very clear and quantifiable and costed what each activity will cost to achieve the objective. So you can see how much it costs to achieve objective 1, objective 2 and objective 3. And in this way you can show the value that marketing is bringing to the organisation by showing what you need to spend for what specific, quantifiable, measurable outcomes. If the management decide that one of these objectives in fact is not cost effective, you decide it's not worth spending some money on something, then that can clearly be deleted from the budget. But at least you know now what it is you're saving and what it is you're not going to achieve as a result. So this is the method that I commend to you for most situations in most charities. Well, that brings me to the end of this briefing, so I'll just go through and summarise the next steps in this programme. In the next briefing, we're going to move on through the SOSTAC model and speak about the next area of SOSTAC, which is S for strategy. And as I will explain next time, this is one of the most widely misused and misunderstood terms in business and in marketing today. If, on the other hand, you have any comments or any feedback about this briefing, then please feel free to get in touch with me directly at this address. It's peter.rees@gmail.com. I'll be very happy to hear from you, and I'll answer any questions as quickly as I can upon their receipt. To conclude, I'd like to leave you with this quote from Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State for the United States of America. And Henry said, "The task of the leader is to get his people from where they are to where they have not been." And I hope that in watching these briefings I will in some way help you to achieve that for your charity. Thank you for your time, and I hope you found this briefing enjoyable and useful. I look forward to joining you again soon for the next briefing. Until then, I'd just like to wrap up by saying goodbye, good luck and good marketing.